In early 1944, as the world was consumed by the flames of war, a singular moment of peril unfolded on the mist-shrouded ridges of northeast India. Imagine the hush of dawn, broken only by the distant rumble of artillery and the cries of soldiers echoing through the jungle. On a sepia-toned map, the finger traces a narrow band of land, the gateway to India, the town of Kohima. Here, two empires collided, and the fate of an entire subcontinent hung in the balance. If Kohima fell, so too might all of India, its cities, its people, its very lifeblood. This was not merely a battle of guns and grit, but a crucible of history, a moment when the world itself seemed to teeter on a knife's edge. To understand how this unlikely corner of the world became the stage for a monumental clash, we must look back to the sweeping momentum of the Japanese advance. By 1944, the Japanese Empire had swept through Southeast Asia, conquering Malaya, Singapore, and Burma with astonishing speed. Their next objective, India. The campaign, codenamed Operation Yugo, was ambitious and audacious. The aim was clear: strike through the Burmese jungle, seize the city of Imphal, and then roll on to Kohima. The goal was to cut off Allied supply routes and ignite a rebellion within British-occupied India, perhaps even toppling British colonial rule itself. The stakes could not have been higher. The roads through Kohima and Imphal were the lifelines feeding the Allied armies in Burma. Lose them, and the Japanese would choke off supplies, isolate British and Indian forces, and open a direct route into the Indian heartland. On one side stood the Japanese 15th Army, some 15,000 troops hardened by years of jungle warfare, led by the steely Lieutenant General Renya Mutaguchi. On the other side, a desperate but determined mix of defenders, British regulars, Indian Army soldiers, Gurkha regiments renowned for their valor, and the local Nagas who knew every ridge and ravine of their homeland. As the Japanese columns slipped through the forests and crossed the Chindwan River, the defenders at Kohima braced themselves. The garrison was small, barely 2,500 men, stretched thin across ridges and trenches dug into the red earth. Outnumbered and nearly encircled, they faced not only the relentless enemy, but the unforgiving terrain, dense jungles, steep slopes, and choking humidity that turned every skirmish into a test of endurance. The siege began in early April, and with it came one of the most iconic and desperate episodes of the entire campaign, the battle for the tennis court. The deputy commissioner's bungalow, perched atop Kohima Ridge, boasted a modest clay tennis court. Here, the front lines ran barely a few yards apart. Allied defenders and Japanese attackers hurled grenades, sometimes no more than a few steps away from one another. The white lines of the tennis court, once a symbol of colonial leisure, were churned into mud and blood. Trees shattered by mortar fire, the air thick with smoke and fear. The men dug in, fighting sometimes hand-to-hand, bayonets clashing in the night. Yet the story of Kohima is not just one of strategy and firepower. It is also a tapestry of human courage, sacrifice, and resilience. Among the defenders were the Naga tribesmen, whose homes and fields became battlefields overnight. Many risked their lives to guide Allied patrols along hidden trails, to gather intelligence, and to supply food and water under withering fire. Their villages were shelled, their families scattered, but their resolve never wavered. One Naga villager later recalled, "We could not stand aside while our land burned. We had to help, or all would be lost." The Gurkhas, famed for their kukri knives and unbreakable spirit, fought tooth and nail in the trenches. Sikh regiments, as well as men from across the Commonwealth, Africans, West Indians, and British Tommies, stood shoulder to shoulder. Accounts speak of bayonet charges in the darkness, of men crawling forward with ammunition strapped to their backs, knowing that surrender was not an option. The price was terrible, friends lost, wounds suffered, but the line held. As April wore on, the defenders grew desperate. Supplies ran low, rations dwindled, and the wounded lay in makeshift hospitals, their only comfort the hope of relief. Then, in the nick of time, the clouds broke with the roar of engines overhead. Reinforcements from the British 2nd Division fought their way up the road, smashing through Japanese roadblocks. Allied planes, braving the monsoon storms and deadly anti-aircraft fire, dropped crates of food, ammunition, and medical supplies. In total, nearly 19,000 tons of supplies would be flown into Kohima and Imphal during the campaign, a lifeline that kept the defenders alive when all seemed lost. For the Japanese, the situation became dire. Their supply lines, stretched to the breaking point, began to unravel. The Allies, now reinforced and resupplied, counterattacked with growing ferocity. The monsoon rains turned supply tracks into rivers of mud, making it impossible for Japanese soldiers to receive food or ammunition. Starvation and disease swept through their ranks. Of the 90,000 Japanese who began the offensive at Imphal and Kohima, nearly 60,000 would be killed, wounded, or succumb to illness, an appalling toll that the Japanese command could neither replace nor ignore. The tide had turned. By late June, the Japanese were forced into a harrowing retreat, abandoning their dead and wounded as they staggered back through the jungles of Burma. The road to India was secure. The twin battles of Kohima and Imphal became the decisive turning point in the Burma campaign, breaking the back of Japan's Yugo offensive and setting the stage for the Allied reconquest of Southeast Asia. Yet, for all their significance, these battles remain little known outside military circles. In Britain, they are remembered by some as Britain's greatest battle, a title bestowed by military historians for the courage, ingenuity, and sacrifice displayed there. But in the wider world, Kohima and Imphal are often overshadowed by the better-known European and Pacific theaters of World War II. The names do not carry the same weight as Normandy or Iwo Jima, but their impact was profound. Had the Japanese succeeded, the course of the entire war in Asia, and perhaps the fate of India itself, might have been irrevocably altered. Today, on the slopes above Kohima, rows of white headstones bear silent witness to the cost of victory. The Kohima War Cemetery, immaculately kept, overlooks the town and the battlefield where so many fell. There, inscribed on a simple stone, are words that echo through the generations. When you go home, tell them of us and say, "For your tomorrow, we gave our today." It is a message of sacrifice, of lives given not for conquest, but for survival, for freedom, and for the hope of a better world. The legacy of Kohima and Imphal is not just one of military triumph, but of reconciliation and remembrance. In the decades since the war, veterans from both sides have come together to honor those who fought and died. In a moving scene, a British veteran traveled to Tokyo to meet his former adversaries, Japanese soldiers now frail with age, their eyes welling with tears as they embraced. "We were enemies then," he said, "but now we remember together." Such moments remind us that, beneath the uniforms and the banners, the pain of loss and the hope for peace are universal. The Naga people, whose land was ravaged by war, emerged from the conflict with new hopes and new challenges. Some dreamed of a separate nation, a dream that has remained elusive amid the shifting tides of post-war politics. Their role as guides, scouts, and protectors during the battle is honored by those who remember. But their struggle for recognition and self-determination continues to this day. The story of Kohima and Imphal is, in the end, a story of humanity. It is about ordinary people thrust into extraordinary circumstances, soldiers and civilians, allies and enemies, all caught in the tempest of war. It is about the choices they made, the friendships forged in adversity, and the legacy they left for those who followed. As the guns fell silent and the monsoon rains washed the battlefields clean, the survivors returned home, their lives forever changed by what they had endured. Some found solace in the bonds of comradeship, others in the quiet act of remembrance. For the families of the fallen, the pain lingered, but so too did the pride in a sacrifice not forgotten. Today, as we look back on those desperate days in the hills of northeast India, we are reminded that history is not just the story of great generals and sweeping campaigns, but of countless individuals, each with their own hopes, fears, and dreams. Kohima and Imphal stand as testaments to the power of courage, the cost of conflict, and the enduring importance of memory. Kohima and Imphal saved India and turned the tide in Asia. They were battles of grit, sacrifice, and unexpected alliances, where men and women of many nations came together in a common cause. Their stories deserve to be told, their lessons remembered. If their voices could speak to us now, from the quiet slopes of the cemetery or the echoing jungles where they once fought, they might say, "Never forget the price of peace. Never forget the courage of those who stood together in the face of darkness. And never forget that even in the fiercest battles, there can be hope, reconciliation, and a better tomorrow." For more stories of forgotten courage from history, keep searching, keep asking, keep remembering. The past has much to teach us, if only we have the courage to listen.